report, check with the committee support if there are any formal apologies or applications for leave of absence that have been received, so that we place them on the record. Committee support.
Morning, Chairperson. We have an apology from the Deputy Minister, and we also have an apology from two members, Ms. Majosi and Ms. Treko. Thank you.
Thank you. So those are the apologies that have been received by the office. I take it that there are no further apologies, but I may want to check with members, understanding different programs of Parliament. If there are any that may have not been recorded. No apologies from members, so I'll take it that we grant permission to those apologies that have been received. I'm really trying to check if we have the minister on the platform at this time.
I will check, Chair.
All right, because honorable members, as it is the norm, I know we do have, as I said, entities. Maybe I must also recognize the others that have been working on the BDM project. As the committee last week would have also asked that we also get a sense of where things are, given that there was to be a meeting that focuses on that aspect of work. But what we usually do is to give the minister the opportunity to do an overview and take the committee into confidence on other matters of public interest, and that in that regard, then get to the actual presentation. And I'm checking if the minister is already on the platform or not, or whether there is a delegation in that regard. Is the minister on board?
Chairperson, they're indicating that the minister will join shortly.
Okay, so there's still time to do connectivity. But maybe as the minister would be doing that, it may be just important to just outline in the meantime what the agenda looks like and how we are going to proceed in terms of the agenda. I know the part that talks to the BDM and so on, so the minister may want to deal with that as it does the opening. I take it that members must have received the documentation with regard to SAPO presentation, as well as with regards to item 2, which is in a way, as members would have looked at it, more of an item that we may have handled and referred back to the committee for formal adoption and sent back to the House as per the ATC. So that draft report would have been circulated for members to go through it and be able to have the report adopted and get to the House. We also have the referral, which is item 3, the South African Post Office Bill, which is tagged Section 75 Bill. And I'm sure in the interactions with the ministry and the department, including during the oversight, members would remember that this matter was raised, that the Cabinet has processed. The matter has been tabled with Parliament to the Speaker's office. It has now been formally referred to the committee. My understanding would be that we are now placing it in the system of the committee, and the department should therefore be ready to come before the committee and do the actual briefing to the committee, so that from that point it becomes the committee process to take matters forward. So that's the purpose of bringing it back, so that it doesn't sit just from the point of the ATC. We then deal with adoption of outstanding minutes. That's going to be necessarily the focus of our meeting. And I think based on the briefing we'll get, we'll be able to make the call on the follow-up as per our agreement, that will probably need regular briefings on some of the matters that are out there and affect the public in general, SAPO, and including this analog switch-off process. So that's basically the agenda would be following. But like I said, we would get the minister at least to speak first and take us through the overview before we can get the department. I can't see on my side any indication if he's been able to connect.
Chairperson, I think the minister joined. I'll just double check, Chair.
Honorable Minister, you are now connected.
My strongest apology, Chair, for whatever reason. I thought the meeting starts at 9:30. I don't know where did I get that.
No, Honorable Minister would really accept your apology gladly, but of course we understand you are now in the communication portfolio. There is a communication and digital technologies. That transition is very important, Minister, because I have thought of another meeting that is very close that used to attend the Joint Committee on Standing Committee on Intelligence. You are now in the communications. You can then unmute your mic so that you communicate. We hear you. We do see you, Honorable Minister. So you came at the right time, though, where we have outlined the agenda, and that you will take us through the overview, and the understanding would be that you'll cover both aspects in introducing the BDM as well as the SAPO, and then hand over for the department if there's any presentation further than that. We've clarified, just to put you on, we've clarified that the other item that relates to ICASA is the committee one, just adoption of a report. Then the fourth one, which is the bill, the SAPO bill, the amendment bill, it's really for it to be part of the system as it is referred to the committee, and we get the department back to introduce formally the bill as it has been through the cabinet. From that point, then becomes the committee process, which includes our public participation plan. That I hope you've now settled, Minister.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With all humility, I will accept that I'm a newlywed in this sector. So I will not pretend otherwise. Therefore, humbly as you nudge me along, I will continue to understand the space better, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm also glad that we have an opportunity to engage the Portfolio Committee on matters we could have been misunderstood as if we're trying to run away because of some attempts to manage the difficulties of the item, in particular that one of SAPO. But I thought, because as per last week, the anticipation is on 2 items. Maybe I want to start, Chairperson, if you so indulge, just to, in my overview, to brief the committee on the BDM, which is the Broadcasting Digital Migration, highly anticipated in the country, especially in as far as it concerns the release of the spectrum, which has got major impact in actually unlocking the economic value of the country. We had a session last week, Chairperson, we had a session with the stakeholders, in particular from the broadcasting arena. It's one of those rare meetings where there seems to be a convergence with regard to so many things. In particular, the most critical one being the agreement that everyone, including the broadcasting sector without exclusion, that everyone agrees that immediately broadcasters should go below 694 hertz. In other words, so that we release the spectrum above that figure for use by telcos. There's an agreement now, and it's quite a very inspiring and a delighting agreement, because it says key stakeholders in the sector are going to be focused on the productive relationship rather than being threats from one angle or another with regard to the direction we're taking. What does that mean? As we have agreed that everyone should go below 694, the challenge we're confronted with, which to me, it has become a challenge that the way we want to deal with, in particular the broadcasting sector, again, seems to be convergent in the sense that there is a fear in the broadcasting sector of losing revenue, and then a strong appeal of steady but sure, that there is an agreement that we must not later than July find a date where we release, where we are able to announce when are we releasing, when are we doing a switch off. So as we do a switch off, because once everyone has gone below 694, it opens the space for a switch off. But because of the revenue fears that I've already spoken about, the steady but sure call from the broadcasters with regard to allowing them to go beyond the switch off date before they finally get off the analog. And there seems to be a concurrence on this fear. Now, we then, against that convergence, it has been agreed that because that discussion, those discussions and that convergence took place on Friday, a number of these institutions still need to consult with their boards, with their principals. There's also a need for them to workshop the modalities of this more than one phase movement on analog below 694, meaning that you move into below 694 phase one, phase two, agree on a date beyond switch off. When are you actually totally getting out of the analog? But ultimately you should. So there's an agreement that there will be a workshop this week over and above consultation with the respective principals. In that workshop, all the relevant stakeholders will be meeting to discuss the modalities of this two-phase approach below 694. Now, against that background, Honorable Chair would remember we would have committed last week to brief you today, and we had hoped that if we brief you today, then we will actually announce to the country finally where are we going. But because of the reasons I've already explained of the need by different institutions to consult with their respective principals, we wanted to indulge the committee to allow this week to actually give space to those consultations so that by next week we're able to come to the committee with a full deal across the board. It's not only consultation with the principals, also they will be meeting these institutions to deal with the modalities of what I've called two-phase. Phase one, going below 690, phase two, at what point beyond switch off do they actually totally get out of what to call of the analog? And knowing very well, Chair, that the free to air affects a lot of audience. So how you get out there seems to be a considerate understanding that it's a matter we cannot just recklessly go about. So that is what is happening in the PDM. Of course, I will await the committee to respond to that so that hopefully we can actually find one another on this approach. Secondly, Chair, if I were to come, therefore, to the only item we're proposing to present, which is the SAPO update, I think it will be useful, Chair, to remind the committee that SAPO challenges are quite long. In particular, the graph went even high, the steeper, around 2014 and onward. From the 5-mine strike and the absorption of no less than 8,000 temporal workers and a number of relevant issues. In other words, the challenge of SAPO is more about the cost structure SAPO is struggling to actually deal with, which derive from many things. Of course, leadership is part of that, is essential, is one of the essential elements. And the staff cost, which is very higher than any other cost, the totality of the cost structure became unaffordable to the extent that we talk of liabilities beyond 8 billion to be taken care of by a revenue of about 2-something billion, especially in this current budget year. Now, immediately you reach that point, creditors become worried whether we will service the loans, whether they will be redeemable at the relevant stage, and indeed they get worried. Thus, some creditors were able to go to court against this fear and uncertainty, and the court would have naturally granted, which is a common cause, a provisionally, and so we'll grant them a permission to allow SAPO to be provisionally liquidated, and then return date being the 1st of June, where the judge will have the full picture of everything from the interested parties and so on. At that point, the judge would decide what to do. And we use then, Chair, that space between the court granting provisional liquidation and the return date to actually explore all options, especially when at face value it became very clear what is unthinkable is allowing SAPO to go under. And fortunately, there seems to be a convergence on this view across the entire society that the worst thing you can allow is SAPO going under, taking into account that no less than 700 SMMEs have a relationship with SAPO, and those SMMEs naturally would actually be giving work opportunities to quite a significant number of people who feed families. Of course, SAPO would, at the moment, is an infrastructure to the payment of grants of no less than 6.9 million people, and SAPO being a debtor to creditors, which are no less than 100, actually comprising of trade creditors and statutory creditors when you talk about pension fund and all SARS and so on. So that will be the profile of the creditors. And all those things require a viable SAPO that can actually serve those, what to call those objectives. We talk about an institution that is one of the rare options for the people who are disadvantaged, who are in far-flung areas. So the issue of allowing SAPO to go under, it's agreed that it's a no-no. Now, we've been working on these options and secured the services of the senior counsel as a BAM and the company, so to actually nudge us on how to actually walk this path of finding a viable option. In that process, we've been able, having looked at all options, to agree that business rescue for SAPO is key, but the DG will do an elaborate presentation. For instance, the fiscus of the country is of such a nature that there is no 8 billion or 4 billion or 5 billion readily available to be paid now. And then you need, therefore, an option that will help SAPO to be reorganized to become a viable institution. 3 things that we needed to respond to for a business rescue is that how are we going to, at a minimal level, be able to finance the creditors' requirements? How are we going to keep the institution number 2 operational whilst the business rescue, if the court so grant, is on? Thirdly, the court would want to see if there's a business turnaround that really is convincing that SAPO can still survive. Those are the 3 issues that we had to deal with in order to feel we've got a basis to go to court. That work has been done, and we went to Cabinet, and Cabinet did actually agree on the business rescue approach. So where we are now, it meant we had to go to court on the 1st. At that point, I would request, Chair, if you so indulge, to allow the DG to move with all the details in this regard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. As the DG comes in, we'll now start with the time that you have the 30 minutes from now, Max, and we'll manage the time, ATG, as we move. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and a very good morning to you, Honorable Chair and Honorable members. Very good morning to the Minister. I'd like to also acknowledge the colleagues from both the post office as well as from the department, as well as then members of the public on the platform. Chair, with your permission, I would request that we be given rights to be able to do the presentation. Thank you. I would also request permission, if I may, to switch off my camera in order to preserve the bandwidth. And next slide, please. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. We would like to take you through the presentation, which the Minister has already alluded to, just to appraise the Portfolio Committee with regards to the situation at the Post Office. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, honorable members, as you know that the Post Office has been put on provisional liquidation. This arises from the financial challenges that the Post Office has been facing over a number of years now. It is not an overnight incident. And then as such, the Post Office, two parties, creditors, then took the Post Office to court, and a judge then put them under business rescue. Next slide. Just to quickly give an overview of the financial situation or the financial challenges that the Post Office has, you would see from the slide that basically the expenses exceed the revenue that the Post Office generates. And both from a projection perspective as well as in terms of the real, these are the financial status as of end of March. Honorable members, I just want to draw to your attention the fact that the drive for, in terms of the increase in terms of the expenses, is due to the staff cost, which sits at about 3.6 billion, and basically is equivalent to about 70% of the overall expenditure of the Post Office. Obviously, this amounts, obviously, the decline in terms of the revenue, and in terms of the decline in terms of mail parcels, and also then the other challenges that the Post Office has in as far as the equipment, which is quite outdated, and the need for, therefore, for them to ensure that they have then the modernized infrastructure to then become competitive in this digital space, has then led to decline in terms of the revenue. Next slide, please. So then I want to also indicate that the department also came to know after the court has passed on the provisional the judgment on provisional liquidation. Usually you would have expected that as that government is 100%, government owns 100% of SAPO, they would have been cited in the papers, but in these instances of these two provisional liquidation or papers being filed, the department was not cited, or the minister was not cited. However, upon us then receiving the information that there is this provisional judgment that has been passed, the government then had to review the options that were put before. These were based on the view that SAPO is a state-owned company with the mandate to achieve the government's priorities in providing universal access and affordable postal as well as financial services to all areas, including the rural areas and small towns within the Republic of South Africa. And we also took into cognizance SAPO's infrastructure as well as the branch networks, and how then these were critical in as far as achieving universal postal services to all citizens in the country. And so with that, my apologies, yes, with that we then had to look at, no, it's okay, next slide please, slide 6. With that we had to look at the available options within law. The first was to whether government would consider allowing for the liquidation, and as I indicated, this would have meant that upon return to court would have been on the 1st of June. Then the judge would have possibly then looked at putting SAPO into final liquidation. And this option for government was not viable, as I indicated, considering the strategic nature of SAPO and the role that it plays. The second option that government explored was with regards to business rescue. Now, this particular option, as the minister alluded, would have then needed to take into account the full might in terms of the debt, and then also weigh in the prospects of whether or not the business rescue option would have been viable. This would have also meant that, as in terms of the business rescue, you would need to make sure that all your creditors are settled in an equitable manner. And this also requires that from a business rescue perspective, you needed to be convinced that the SAPO will remain a strategic contributor in as far as both economic inclusion or also then being viable into the future. And the third option that government considered was the compromise of creditors. And this particular option looks at settling of creditors as it would be under the business rescue, but without the benefit of having then the business rescue in place. The settlement of the creditors would have required that there would have been available funds. As you know, there was a 2.4 billion that government had put forward as part of then supporting the SAPO of Tomorrow strategy. And that 2.4 billion, when we looked at it against the creditors, was insufficient. And therefore, this particular option posed, therefore, the challenge of the fact that you will not then be able to settle all the creditors, and it would have been, therefore, biased and unfair. The last option that was being looked at was on the terms of full payment of creditors. And now this option requires that we settle all the creditors, billion available, and the uncertainty of whether or not any other additional funding would be required, because that particular funding will have to have been made as an application during the budget window period in government, and therefore this particular option was also not considered. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the option that government took, as the minister indicated, that cabinet endorsed, was therefore to place SAPO under the business rescue. And so obviously that would require, as the minister alluded, that you needed to ensure an equitable payment of all the creditors, ensure that SAPO remains operational during the business rescue period, and obviously then to ensure that or be convinced of the SAPO of tomorrow. And we do still see this particular option as viable, considering, as I said, the critical and strategic role being played by SAPO in the provision of essential services. And this is obviously retained both in terms of its mandate, as well as also then the SAPO of tomorrow strategy. And as you know, honorable members, next slide. These essential services include, next slide, please. These essential services include, amongst others, mail as well as parcel delivery, postal banking, courier services, retail services, social grant services, as well as distribution of chronic medication. Still on this slide, this would then mean that the government, after cabinet gave the approval, we filed therefore for business rescue. And on obviously then the judge will then determine the feasibility of the various options that are still available to the post office. and to investigate for then the appropriateness of these options if need be. And for us, then the next slide, please, is that we've tasked our legal representative and senior counsel to then proceed with that. Just to appraise then members that subsequently to then government filing as an interested party, I want to indicate that it wasn't the SAPO board filing for business rescue, but it was government. On the 1st of June, the High Court extended the provisional liquidations return date from the 1st to the 30th. Unless obviously then the court issues a directive different to that, the application for the business rescue is going to be held on the 4th of July. Next slide. And the viability, as I indicated, for us as to why then government considered this particular option, as I indicated, that we do consider SAPO as a strategic partner in terms of service delivery. And we also do see it as a viable entity going into the future, still playing a role even in the digital economy. We do believe in the post of tomorrow strategy. As you know, that the post of tomorrow strategy basically outlines key areas for SAPO in as far as repositioning it in the digital or e-commerce era, as then the hub, the e-commerce hub. It also then talks about the full utilization of the SAPO's infrastructure. This also includes the properties, repositioning those into digital hubs, amongst others, and obviously then ensuring that SAPO then plays a key role in the authentication and certification of documentations, as we are now in the big data era. And for that, we're very confident in terms of the prospects as far as then the implementation of the Post Office of Tomorrow strategy, and we also recognize its commercial viability. We also do see it in terms of other core strategic assets, and these also then include the properties, and we've done an assessment, but I think the business rescue will also do an assessment in terms of the non-core properties and decide as to how then they would be disposed if need be. Next slide. The other areas that we've looked at in as far as then the business rescue or the viability of SAPO, we looked at the adjustments or the financial projections. And whilst we project a revenue decline on revenue, we've also seen that this particular revenue decline has actually decreased as well in the last financial year. The expenditure has decreased, and therefore there are actually improvements. The salaries as well, we've seen SAPO has already embarked, management of SAPO has embarked in terms of the voluntary servants packages as well as Section 189. And obviously then this will look at the salary expenses reduction. And next slide, please. And we've also looked in terms of the transfer of the SASSA grant to the Post Bank, as also then alleviating some of then the pressures. With regards to the main issue in terms of, as I said, that 70% of the expenditure relates to salaries. As I indicated, management has already commenced with regards to reducing the headcount in terms of the 7,000. Honorable members, just to clarify, the 7,000 actually gave rise, if you remember, during the 2014-2015 strike, some of those officials at the post office were actually voluntary or part-time workers. And as part of then settlement, they were actually then incorporated into the establishment as full-time members. That was over about 8,000 workers that SAPO basically inherited. And that obviously led to the huge salary bill. And now they are looking at processes in terms of then reducing the headcount. And this particular headcount reduction is also we're also applying other measures to make sure that it's not people that would be out in terms of destitute. There are those obviously who have opted for early retirement, but others are actually then going to be transferred into an owner-driver scheme, where then we're basically creating employment or SMME employment, and they'll be able to then provide services back to SAPO. Next slide, if you can then, just for us to allude in terms of the business rescue or the provisional liquidators. We've got the court has appointed Mesra Shaban as well as Mr. J. Musi as the provisional liquidators, and obviously they are currently therefore in charge of the post office. The application for the business rescue, if successful, will then suspend the provisional liquidation proceedings. The joint provisional liquidation will remain in place until obviously then the courts have appointed the business rescue. And if we're successful, and that we're hoping that next month, we will then hear the outcomes thereof. And then they remain, the provisional liquidators have been cooperating with the post office, including obviously through the office of the group CEO. Next slide. Just to highlight some of then, as I conclude, or to reaffirm why then government took this particular stance in as far as ensuring that we file for business rescue. Honorable members, the post office currently has about 11,000 employees. And as you know that if then going to final liquidation, all those employees will then be out of the job. We also know that the post office has third-party payments. Along with that, the motor vehicle licenses renewal, about 4 million of those are done annually. As I indicated earlier, they distribute these chronic medications. More than anything else, there are also 700 suppliers within the post office, even though only 2 of those suppliers actually took the post office or 2 creditors only took the post office to court. In the event that there's final liquidation, we are probably seeing quite a substantive number of small, medium enterprises losing their income, which they were getting from the post office. And then lastly, obviously, SAPO remains as then the platform in as far as then the distribution of the social grant, especially for those in rural and remote areas. We are confident that there is the future for the post office. We're also confident and supporting the post office in remaining operational during this particular period, which is very challenging. We've noted the decrease in revenue and the impact it will have. We are working, or the post office is working with the provisional liquidators in as far as trying to ensure that as it remains operational, it drives and for new businesses or ensures that the current businesses remain operational. And they're focusing in terms of reducing, therefore, the backlog as far as then post office by increasing the availability of vehicles for delivery during this period. I'd like to then hand over back chair to the Minister and back to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. Honorable Chair, that's where we are. As we can say that there was a need that there must be commitment to fund the business process, the business rescue process, which you must cable before the court, and the cabinet is committed to that. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable the Minister, honorable members, as you know, this would also be the opportunity for members to engage the presentation. I will now look at those that have got their hands up. You will also assist me from the side of the committee support. I will start with Honorable Tembu, followed by Honorable Mazzone. I hope I'm not jumping anyone. Followed by Honorable Kumbu. We have got Honorable Bodlani. As I say, I hope I've not jumped anyone.
Chairperson, Mr.
No, I've already spoken to that. She's first, followed by Honorable Mazzone, followed by Honorable Kumbu, followed by Honorable Bodlani. I also have, just for purpose of record again, an apology put on our platform, which is Honorable Kubega, not well, hence not in the meeting. I think it's important for record. Then Honorable Mlala, you last I see your hand on it now. I'll start in that order. The Honorable Mtembo, you can proceed.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Greetings to you, greetings to the Minister and the Department. Greetings to all members of the committee and all leadership of the entities. Honorable Chair, firstly, I want to welcome a presentation, and I want to comment and thank and appreciate also the good work done by the department in trying to rescue SAPO. Why I'm always repeating this, Chairperson, we know this is not easy. There are all challenges that are there, but we notice that the department and the minister, they keep on pushing in making sure that SAPO is coming back again and do the good work for the people. I don't have much to say, but I really appreciate the good work done by the department. Thank you so much.
I now recognize, thank you, Honorable Tembo. I now recognize Honorable Mazzone.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning to my colleagues and good morning, Minister Gungubele. It's good to see you and to see you in good health. Colleagues, I am not that enthused by what I'm hearing, unfortunately, and let me explain why. I took the liberty of going to court on Thursday to hear the unopposed motion that was brought before the High Court in the Pretoria High Court by the Post Office. And let me explain what occurred on the morning. Firstly, the issue was, just so that you really do understand that I was sitting in the courtroom. It was listed as number 32 on the unopposed motion roll. And what happened was the advocate for the Post Office arrived, and it's a very small courtroom. It was heard in courtroom 4D. And imagine one of our very small meeting rooms in Parliament. It's even smaller than that meeting room. So as soon as there's just a few people in the court, you notice it because it's such a small courtroom. The advocate for the Post Office arrived. Subsequently, right behind him arrived approximately 12 to 13 other advocates. The judge then looked at the papers and she asked what exactly was going on. And the advocate for the post office said that he was applying for a rule NISI. Some people say NISI, but I say it NISI, which basically the rule NISI puts a hold on the current set of circumstances because there has been a change in circumstance. And in this case, the change in circumstance was that the applicant was no longer just Bay City Trading, who had taken the post office to court to be liquidated, which was then the partial liquidation was granted on the basis of Bay City Trading's application. A further 12 applicants had now joined the case. So the judge looked through the papers, and then the judge informed us of something quite interesting. She said to the court, look, she said, you're asking for a rule NISI to be applied here, and there are 12 new applicants that are going to join this case. But the Minister of Communications has yesterday applied for an urgent application for business rescue to be heard on the 7th of July. So in actual fact, a business rescue plan is not in place, as the court has to decide whether or not the business rescue plan is viable and whether or not the urgent application will in fact be heard. So that still is a legal process that has to take place on its own. Also then, what we heard was that it's very unusual for an urgent business rescue plan to be put in place when a rule NISI is granted in the court. And the judge then granted the rule NISI. So then off trotted all the advocates. So the rule NISI is now in place. And I believe that they have until the 8th of October to come back to the court and tell the court, you know, where they stand with regards to the liquidation of the court. So we sit in a situation, Chairperson, where we have two legal issues occurring at the same time. In the Pretoria High Court, we have the learned judge who has granted the rule NISI, and 12 new applicants have joined the original applicant in the liquidation of the post office application. And then we have the Minister of Communications, who has applied for an urgent business rescue to be heard in what I assume was the Cape Town High Court. I'm not sure what court, and I mean, Minister must correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure what court Minister applied to. So there are now two legal remedies or applications that are being sought. So this throws a spanner in the works to a certain degree, because we now don't know what will occur in either court, because each court is hearing something different. So I'd like to hear from the Minister what the legal advice was that Minister got with regards to the rule NISI being granted at the High Court in Pretoria, while there was also an application for urgent business rescue being done the day before the application for the rule NISI was heard in the Pretoria High Court. Thanks very much, Chair.
I now recognize Honorable Kombo. Let's proceed.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and greetings to the Minister, honorable members, and everyone on the platform. Chair, let me also appreciate the presentation made, which are more of a briefing. Chair, on the BDM issues, I think, Chair, given the fact that a number of broadcasters are still going to consult their principals or their boards, and I think we must allow that process of consultation to unfold. so that we can get a proper briefing in our next meeting. But Chair, we appreciate the fact that there is some kind of agreement between these various broadcasters. And that's why, Chair, I'm of the view that we do not engage the BDM issues today until we get that briefing which I'm talking about. Thank you.
Honorable Gumbo, and I recognize Honorable Bolani. Can proceed.
Chairperson. Chairperson, I think on the BDM, I'm listening to the minister, and in my mind, I'm thinking the minister can really sell ice to an Eskimo. And this is in the way he humbly presents what really could have been said months ago. Because the reality is that we do appreciate that there has been a cabinet reshuffle. This is a new minister, as it were. But what he is giving us leaves a lot to be desired for his predecessor. But without saying much, I will just say I appreciate the humble nature in which he has provided feedback, and hopefully we will get more solid confirmation of what the analog switch off date will be. Needless to say that the status quo is unacceptable. Chairperson, on SAPO, I think we are on record as the Democratic Alliance saying the government interventions are just delaying the inevitable. And I would like to say to the department and to the minister, SAPO cannot be salvaged without some sort of private-public partnerships. And I do appreciate that now the process is unfolding in the court, and we can only ventilate in as far as this being in the court. And I'm not going to go into details, and I've got my notes here saying decline in postal services and financial revenue. And my question would have been, with all things considered, what has been the update on that with the implementation of the Post Office of Tomorrow strategy? Again, we are still recording that SAPO remains at a 70% expenditure on its staff. And I'm not sure if I really understand how the Post Office of the Future Strategy responds to this. And in the same vein, how the right sizing of the entity is, and I do understand that this is really operational. But while we appreciate that there are people who are taking voluntary severance packages and the entity is right sizing, there should also be consideration of the skills. How deliberate is SAPO about making sure that you don't lose the people that you actually need for this strategy of tomorrow? And you know, SAPO being this old, you always have people that would be resistant to change. What sort of interventions in terms of training that SAPO is going to do to upskill the people that are already in the system? Because the reality is that you cannot bring new people and take out the new. There should just be some sort of upskilling for the people that are in the system if SAPO is going to succeed. And what does the current process mean for job security for the other employees, with the process being where it is again in the courts? What is the morale? We always talk in this committee about the morale, because it is the workers that have to go out there and put shoulder to the wall and make sure that SAPO is sustained. So how is the communication being made to the workers? How is it being received actually? And I did not quite get a sense, Chairperson, to say, besides the 70% being the wage bill, what is the next biggest expense for SAPO besides salaries? Just for interest's sake. And Chairperson, the presentation speaks about the sale of non-core properties. Does SAPO have an idea of what would be the expected revenue? And I don't necessarily, just as on a high level, what criteria would be used to identify those? Because we have seen in the past where government will say, oh, we are offloading, and you come back with a big building being sold for R1 for 1 million when it could have been 10 million. I hope that there is going to be some truth and some due diligence in how that is going to be done. SAPO talks about wanting to re-enter the e-commerce and courier space. For me, at this point, I would say reputation is everything. with where we are, and maybe I must keep my question for when we entertain the bill, but because I'm already on the platform, I'm not seeing much marketing being done to position SAPO as a preferred service provider. How is SAPO, in the whole bigger scheme of things, positioning itself, advertising itself, marketing itself to be a preferred service provider? Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Polani. I now recognize the Honorable Mulala.
Greetings to the Minister and the department. Greetings to my colleagues in the Portfolio Committee. Let me first thank the Minister and the department for the presentation. I think we should all be moving from the same principle, because in our previous 3-4 meetings, we've been saying that the principle is let's save South African Post Office. I think from where I'm sitting, any effort that helps to save the post office for now, it's highly appreciated. And maybe there's just few questions of clarity that I would like to ask. Firstly, it's relating to the main cost driver. I want the department to clarify, because they are saying that the main cost driver is 70% around of the wage bill. But at the same time, they are saying that there's about 8,000 contract workers. Now, I want to know if this wage bill is driven by contract workers. And if that is the case, when is their contract ending? So that, because this might also be an issue going forward, even if the court grant the business risky approach, what will be the legalities around these contract workers? Because surely if the department could further clarify whether outside of this 8,000 contract workers, what is the actual permanent staff of SAPO, so that we can then compare the two. Unless if I did not get it right, the department or the minister will clarify that. The second issue is around the post office of tomorrow strategy. My own view is...
Sorry, Honorable Chair.
The Honorable Minister, Honorable Mlala, is still on the platform. You can just hold back.
No, I wanted to say, Chair, I wanted him to repeat the first portion. That's my request, if you so indulge.
Okay, Honorable Mlala, I'm sure you heard that point. You can clarify it, but proceed so as to conclude this point that you are in, and then you can clarify further.
Yes, the first question is that there's a report about 8,000 contract workers. And that report relates to the main cost driver, which the department said it's almost 70% of the wage bill. Now, my question is, when is the end of these contractors? When is their contract ending? And what is the actual permanent staff in terms of figures of SAPO? Whether this main cost driver is driven by the contract workers, in that case, surely we should know when their contract ends, or is both the permanent and the contract workers combined? What would be the figure around? How many employees are there in SAPO that are permanent? I hope the question is clear now. Now, the second issue is around the post office of tomorrow strategy. Even though we agreed and adopted this strategy, for me, it will quite be interesting if we succeed to get a business risk practitioner, because he might also bring along his own strategy. It will be quite interesting. For me, we should leave all these processes until the court has determined what is actually the way forward, so that the business practitioner possibly can be engaged around the strategy if he's accepting that strategy. And maybe my last question will be around the decline in revenue beyond the business risk practitioner being appointed. I also want to know how long is this? How long has this post office of tomorrow strategy being in place? Because the reason I'm asking that, if it's more than a year in place and it has not made a difference thus far, maybe we should consider the review beyond the business risk practitioner, so that we can look into the weaknesses and challenges thus far. Because I remember that it was adopted somewhere around last year, I think. So if it's more than a year, we should look for landmarks and say, so far, what has it achieved? What were the challenges? So that we don't just emphasize on the strategy, despite the fact that it has not made any meaningful impact since last year. I think those are my question. But with regard to BDM, I would appreciate the presentation by the minister, and because what I appreciate most is that the minister has actually indicated some timelines. By end of June, there should be an announcement. At least there's progress in that regard. So we'll hold the minister to his weight by end of June if there's no announcement. But we also appreciate the fact that all the stakeholders, both the telcos and the broadcasters, have in principle agreed on the BDM approach, that ultimately this is a government policy. So as much as they will push us to court, but at least for now, the negotiations are quite promising. I thank you, Chair. Those are just my comments.
Thank you, Honorable Mlala. The Minister and the team, the other questions and comments, you may want to respond to those, but of course you'll be guided by yourself whether you want to come in first or you would want to close the gaps at the end. But it's over to you and your team. You have borrowed power. You have got borrowed power, just remember. You've got borrowed power to handle this aspect and bring back to the chair of the committee.
So can I come in, Chair?
Yes, use the borrowed power.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'm very much heartened by the constructive response that comes from the members of the Portfolio Committee across the board. But I just wanted to clarify something, and I hope Honorable Pelani is not an Eskimo. although I take that very kindly. I'm saying, Honorable Chair, if I might to respond to Honorable Mazoni, this process has always been under Rule Nisi. It's just a simple word of if an order cannot be given subject to a particular condition is met over a particular period. It's Rule Nisi. It has been Rule Nisi from February, so it's not new, the Rule Nisi issue. So it's a simple language. It's about issues of a return date. Now, the second issue, you must understand that the shareholder is responding to an application to a court order granting provisional liquidation to applicants who are creditors. That's why now we are under provisional liquidation, and that's a different case. The shareholder now is applying for a rescue, so the two cases are not the same. But we want to implore the members that we all focus on the application for the rescue. This case has the potential to have many people coming with different views. The challenge we have as the shareholder is to table a convincing case that business rescue is the option to follow. And a number of other things will happen, which really we're not very much worried about. But I also want to say, when I say I'm not worried about, is all those issues, as long as they come to engage our application, which will be prosecuted in one court. I also want to say that what is anticipated is that now that the discussion is around, I think it's the 14th July or 4, I've just forgotten the date now. 15th June, we are anticipating if there are any, we're anticipating answering affidavit to what the SC has placed before the court regarding our application for rescue. So even there's a potential of different people responding to that in different ways. But what we're going to do, our focus is on the merits of the rescue and being geared to respond to whatever other reaction in that regard. The cases can be won because there's a creditor's case, there's a response, there's a shareholder's case of applying for a rescue. Those cases are not the same. Having said that, so in other words, there's nothing untoward if one is to say. Having said that, I'll ask TG to deal with all other details, and if there's anything left out, I'll come in. TG?
Thank you very much, Minister, and through your chairs, I may respond.
Yes, TG.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Chair, the Honorable Mazoni, I think Minister has indicated, just to once again reiterate, these are two separate matters. The court case on Thursday that Honorable Mazoni is referring to was the court case, was the provisional liquidators who were then in court, and obviously while then there is a queue of additional lawyers, or the 12 people referred to would have then be the ones that the provisional liquidators has been coercing in terms of them joining their application. So it is not the department or the government's lawyers. So that will also mean, as Minister indicated, that there will be then two separate cases running parallel. Ours, in terms of then the application for the business rescue, would be heard next month, and then they have then been their case in terms of then requesting for the extension is also ongoing. Then Honorable Gumbu, with regards to the BDM, has indicated the intent. Sorry, there's another mic that's on. The intent for us to ensure that we clear
Minister,
this.
please mute.
Thank you, Chair. We clear then the spectrum that was, as you'd know, auctioned last year and does belong to the mobile operators. And so this two-pronged approach is certainly, it's still in the intention is for us to move towards the conclusion and switching off analog. The teams are meeting today and tomorrow in as far as then to finalize the second phase of this approach. Honorable Bodlani, with regards to SAPO, I'm going to, after I've concluded, invite the Group CEO just to clarify the issues in as far as then the internal operations at SAPO. But safe to say that with regards to the matter of the workers or the job security, immediately upon the announcement of the business or the provisional liquidators, the minister did issue statements which we shared with all the employees, but also general public, just to allay fears in as far as that government was making interventions, and now it is publicly known what those interventions are. The minister has also engaged the workers and on an ongoing basis. Last of those meetings was last week, and obviously in terms of then the various representatives, just again to address these particular concerns that they do have, and they will remain available to ensure that we do provide the assurance of stability in as far as under just these difficult and uncertain situations that we're in. With regards to I think I'll request then the Group CEO to talk also on the property issues, maybe just to move to what Honorable Molala has raised. Honorable Molala, the 8,000 workers, it's actually 8,101 workers. Yes, there were casual or contract workers, and basically they were absorbed following the strikes. As you know, part of the strike process was that they removed labor brokers, and during the period between 2014-15, as I indicated, up to 2017, they basically, SAPO management took the decision, or SAPO board took the decision to absorb these 8,101. And certainly that meant, as I said, the increase in as far as the wage bill, because if you were casual or contract workers, you were only working a portion of the time, and now that meant you come in. There are also other than responsibilities that meant in as far as issues related to your pension, issues related to medical aid, etc., which then also was adversely impacted by these additional, and most certainly also I think even the wage bill itself, because it had not structured in such a way that it would have inherited the 8,000 plus workers. With regards to the Post of Tomorrow strategy, yes, Post of Tomorrow strategy was adopted last year. There are moderate implementations of it. I think the Group CE can allude further to it. But the most inhibiting factor has been the fact that funding was only made available, as you would know, honorable members, during the special adjustment, and even those funds, whilst the announcement was made on the 30th of March, those funds still remain to be physically available for the execution. However, we've had to look at creative ways or find means of making sure that at least we start with the implementation of the Post of Tomorrow strategy, even in those more pockets. We do still remain that it is viable. It does, as I think Honorable Bodana was also talking to, position SAPO within this digital economy era. And I think obviously with then the business rescue practitioner, part of what their duties would then to look at a new business model for the post office. And obviously we are hoping that there would also then be other narrations as far as then taking or leapfrogging the post office into a digital hub, which are then the aspirations that are in the Post Office of Tomorrow strategy. May I then request the Group CE Chair to then respond to the other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. Good morning to the Honourable Chair and members, the Honourable Minister, my colleagues on the platform. I would like to ask for permission to switch my video off and respond to some of the questions that have not been touched on. Basically, in terms of the costs of the company, the leading cost is indeed the employment cost at 70%, but followed by the security costs, in particular to the work in relation to the work we do on SASSA, property costs as well, the cost of property, IT costs, as well as the transport and banking charges. So those would be the leading costs in terms of the company. With regards to the strategy itself, we do believe that the Post Office of Tomorrow is still a very relevant strategy. It was well researched, and it also is based on or is aligned to the market study that the department had recently commissioned. And when they came up with the ideas on the market study, we then could see that the strategy is very much aligned. The reason that there seems to be a delay or no real improvement in terms of the strategy implementation itself is that even when the strategy was approved, we did indeed say that it is dependent on funding being given to SAPO. At the time, there was no funding. Hence, the 2.4 billion was made available to partially implement the strategy, but at the same time, ensure that we were to look at which creditors we could pay and how we could make sure that we are honorable in terms of honoring those costs of the creditors. But unfortunately, before the 2.4 was given to SAPO, then the liquidation or the provisional liquidation then came, and the money has still not flown into SAPO coffers. So therefore, there hasn't been an ability for the company to implement the strategy. However, whatever we could implement in the last 2 years or so, and also after the strategy was then approved, we have done even without any funding at this point. So hence, you heard the DG say, even in terms of the costs or the losses in terms of the financial year, there has already been an improvement to prior years. So those were some of the initiatives that we took, trying to ensure that by the time the funding arrived, we would have already put things in place. In terms of the permanent staff members at SAPO, as of today, we have 11,878. And the wage bill, I think it has been explained that we no longer have contract workers because they were all absorbed. And the DG mentioned that they were absorbed between 2014 and 2017, which is the right number that she gave, 8101. But if you track back to 2012, you would find that the total number that was absorbed comes up to 10,384. So that has been part of the problem of how SAPO got to where it is, because as you increase the cost of employment, but the revenue is also declining because of the changes in the environment and all sorts of other reasons that we have mentioned before. There was a question around the staffing. We have found that since we have opened up the voluntary severance package and people taking the severance and saying, well, I can see what's happening in the company, I'm happy to walk away, and we have given them whatever is due to them. We have lost some of the skills we would have wanted to retain. So that question raised by Honorable Bodlani is relevant. But we were also in the process of the Section 189, which is an ongoing process that now will have to happen in the context of the business rescue going forward. But I think that the main problem in trying to reskill and keep people in SAPO is that the SAPO of today is skilled with people who were required in the SAPO of yesterday. So now we require new skills going into the SAPO of tomorrow, and therefore we're going to need to go back into the market and find those skills. Some people can be trainable, but some of them will find the bulk in particular because they were, employed to sort mail, to do manual work, to do other things, and now we are moving into this digital company and modernizing and doing all sorts of other things, and therefore you find that the skills gap is going to be big. But those are things that we are discussing at executive level, and those would come through when it comes to the final numbers that we have to deal with. DG, I think I've answered all the questions that were outstanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to hand back to the Minister for the Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, CEO, Group CEO. Thank you, DG. All we want to say to Honorable Member Bodlani, especially with regard to the anxieties she has, with regard to whether indeed the turnaround for the post-push is being attended to in as many possible ways as possible. What is key now is that we want to focus our energy, of course, answering the questions you have raised very strongly for the judge to actually be persuaded. But we believe that there's a number of options to turn around the post office. And all what we are crossing our fingers is that the court respond to our prayer favorably. Thanks for the opportunity, Honorable Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable members, having been clarified or responded to in terms of your questions, I will check if there's probably a follow-up on a question that you think would have not been covered, so that we can then, after that, move towards some wrapping up on this item and get to the next item. Any member who wants to make a follow-up? I take it that there are no follow-ups. With that having been said, Honorable Minister, I think what is quite clear from the committee is that there is appreciation of the presentation made in keeping the committee informed. And I'm sure you could pick up that the committee would really want to be kept abreast at all times, and hence that appreciation. Because in our discussions last week, if you take the BDM, for example, I think the report that you are giving us begins to talk to exactly what the approach of the committee would have been, that of getting the stakeholders, look at balancing all concerns, whether it is Santec, whether it is the broadcasters from a point of revenue and all that, but as well as the telcos that may have also purchased the spectrum, which broadcasters may be sitting on, and therefore affects what ICASA would have been able to achieve in the auction, as reports suggest that there are those that will have not paid. So we really appreciate, Minister, that at least you've taken that quite seriously, and we can really support that at the end, if all stakeholders are in agreement, that announcement should be pretty soon. Because I think from where we are, we have recorded our dissatisfaction that from time to time, as a country, were unable to meet deadlines, and we have been first in this program. The continent was looking at us, but we seem to be right at the end. So further delays could be quite costly, even from a point of credibility, if one has to put it in that way. So we do support that we move forward on that part, and quite clearly also on the post office. At least generally, there's agreement, like Honorable Mlala would have also said on principle. The point is really to save SAPO, make it a viable state-owned enterprise. But we're also alive to the realities that the fiscals would not agree in terms of resources being available at any given time. There's no abundance of resources. And all options need to be looked at. And I think there's emphasis on exploring even partnerships. But of course, there's no option about privatizing it. I think it should be clear that it's about partnerships. I think there's that emphasis from members, so that the poor would still access the services, especially those like universal service obligations that SAPO carries. So would really appreciate that this matter is resolved, and we'll keep on giving that support from the side of the committee. Of course, every time Minister does something about business rescue, the fear is what other members would have raised, that will probably even change the strategy that was looked at of making the post office viable to the post office of tomorrow strategy, whilst we still remain with our footprint in the far-flung areas, the rural areas, where our people experience the first service of government through a post office in a proper sense. So I think live with that as you go back, that the support of the committee on both items as you are handling them. But of course, I'll be doing a disservice if I do not put these 2 points. That firstly, we sometimes we can be, because we may forget and do not recognize the work done thus far. The 2.4 billion, as the GCO said correctly, it's as a result of efforts of this committee also to ensure that finally Treasury would consider this point on the basis that the implementation of the post office of tomorrow strategy was also dependent on financial injection, which the post office couldn't raise in the market given its liquid status. And this committee has backed up that throughout. So I thought it's important to make that appreciation. And unfortunately, as it lands at a period when creditors also go the other way, making it locked in that sense. And hence it is part of the discussions now as you look at the rescue. So I thought it's important that we have touched on that. But the other thing is that really, as we appreciate the move, so as to be consistent also to ourselves, that we did appreciate even the other changes when there was your predecessor, that there was a move from what we were experiencing 15 years ago, as the minister would have joined when the foundation was laid by the previous one. And in this period, which is in this 6th administration, because we must look at it in that totality, we have made strides and kept to our words that we would not want to be part of the statistics. that we also presided over it, but nothing happened. And I think you will understand, therefore, Minister, the pressure about timelines is because we must remain true to that commitment we made to South Africans, that our oversight will help us to move out of being part of statistics. So I just thought it's important we clarify so that we don't play one against the other, but that it's a continued journey, which this committee has been privy to be presiding over. So please take note of that, Minister. We are going to keep you to your words, as Honorable Mlala said, that when you appear before the committee, we'll be anticipating the announcement of the date after the meeting, the committee, as you come before the committee, so that we do not say things we would not do. But we say things because we can do them. And when you are ready, I like that. That's the time you come back to the committee within the timelines you've given as indicative to us. So that's basically that in terms of summarizing how the members would have contributed to today's meeting, Honorable Minister. But like I said, when you joined, the other two items, one would be related to a report we need to adopt of ICASA. And I'm sure if honorable members would agree, we will be able to deal with that report quickly. But I want us to just move briefly to the SAPO, the amendment bill. And that we would have said it's put in the agenda so that you are able to come back as the department and introduce the bill properly, so that we are also able to take legal section with us throughout, like we did with the other bill. And I'm sure members would agree with me that at least we need to get the indication from the department. We have now put this bill as part of the system of parliament. Now it's getting into the committee. At least an indication. We know we have got a roundtable discussion. We'll get indication in that regard on whether we are getting everybody we have invited on also an important matter about elections. Fake news and so on as we get to elections. But we could squeeze Minister. We think that the department should be ready at least to introduce the bill formally to the committee, so that the committee can take up its processes, which include the public participation side of things. I hope I will have support of the members in terms of what I'm gonna raise as expectation, just from the lessons we had from the post-bank amendment bill. That when you make the presentation, would also want to get a sense in terms of SAYAS, that the socio-economic impact assessments have been done, but also just briefly, if the matter is served before NETLEC, at least take the committee into confidence in a transparent way as to what the other role players would have considered, and probably if there are areas of disagreement, at least we know those areas and the committee can pay attention to those. And where there are agreements, at least there's also clarity there that there would have been agreement on certain areas, which does not anyway take out the need for public participation to further capacitate the committee to apply its mind at the end. So I would want to really, if committee members agree, that we at least complete this part by getting that response from yourselves, and that when we adopt the report, even if you are not on the platform, we just proceed and then adopt our minutes and plans. Is that agreed, members?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. So we can get a response from yourselves, Minister, your readiness for next week. to come at least introduce, which it's something we can do immediately after the roundtable.
Can we indicate immediately after this meeting, Chair?
Okay.
I'm saying this because it's not a matter I planned. Was in my head as I came here in the meeting.
I think that will be fair, Minister. But the indication is really the time part.
Okay.
that you bring things to it. Otherwise,
I'm saying
gone through you already. We'll respect that, Minister. That will engage post the meeting. But that's really how we want to handle it, so that formally we bring legal people from the Parliament side to be on board right in the beginning until the end, with all the areas I said should also be covered as you present to us. With that having been said, as I said, Honourable Minister, the intention will not be to keep you and your team if you really want to go and save the post office. That will release you to go and save the post office and really move faster to switch off what could be switched off. Otherwise, we can proceed on our own as these are just committee.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, honourable members. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Committee support, if we can just fly it.
Will do, Chair. One second, Chairperson. Can you see the report, Chair?
On my side, I can see honourable members. Can you see the report?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. As I said, it's a report more to update it to the state. Otherwise, it has been before the committee before on the remuneration or draft notice on determination on determining the remuneration of councillors, ICASA. We'll go through it. If there's any member want to raise anything on the page, you'll indicate. Let's proceed. If there are no further corrections or inputs, can we also get a formal mover, seconder for adoption of the report as presented?
I move, Chair.
Honorable Kumbo moves. Can I get a seconder? Can I get a seconder?
I second, Honourable Chair.
In 10 seconds, may I just check if there's any objection in us adopting this report? No objections, the report is agreed to. We'll now look at the minutes of the Portfolio Committee meeting, 23rd May 2023, which was the briefing by Public Service Commission, the May, on the roundtable discussions on services offered by SITA. there any hand that I may not see that required corrections to be made? Can I then get a mover and seconder for the minutes of the 23rd May?
I move, Chair.
Honorable Bolani moves. Can I get a seconder?
I second, Honorable Chair.
Honorable Tembo, second. We now move to the minutes of the 30th May. Max Building 201. I know on this one, Honorable Mazone can't help the meeting. So,
Budlani has a hand up, Chair.
okay, Honorable Bolani.
Chairperson, not to disturb the sequence of the minutes and the proposal, there is a sentence on page 5, Roman figure 3. So when we get there, please. Oh, no. No, I don't know which now page one. There's a sentence that says SAPO, the committee has agreed that SAPO must be rescued at whatever cost. I thought I had captured correctly that it would be on page 5, but I seem to have made, it's on 6 actually, point number 6. I beg your pardon, Chairperson. Yeah, point number 6, Roman numeral 3, that the department should endeavor to save SAPO at whatever cost. I think that does not capture the position that I raised in that meeting to say it cannot be at whatever cost. So I don't know how we can rephrase that sentence, but in all fairness, it does capture how you phrased it when you summarized, but it does not capture the spirit that I employed when I spoke on SAPO and there needing to be caution in how everything happens around SAPO and its rescue. So the whatever cost is problematic to me.
I'm just checking if other members have got any clarities to give there. My understanding was that an old hand, Honorable Bolan.
No, I've made my point, Chairperson. I'm taking guidance from you.
Okay, I thought you were still raising the hand. So I wanted to check with other members because I take it that in the way you're putting is that we should leave with the summary we have made just as we concluded the previous item. Did I get you correctly? So that we then
I missed that. I beg your pardon, Chairperson, you were saying?
No, I'm saying the point you are dealing with is at all costs. Otherwise, you would be comfortable that the summary that we made earlier on captures that point, because you're also looking at public-private partnerships and so on, right?
I think, Chairperson, we were only explicit about public-private partnerships in this meeting. At the previous one.
Well, I'm sure get my point. My point is really that the point about at all costs, that's where you are.
Yes, that's my contention.
Issue, yes. So I'm saying if you take the summary took into account now that there are other measures that could still be put in place. The only point is to ensure that SAPO is saved from going under and it can still serve the people.
Then I don't understand you, Chairperson, because that is from today's proceedings.
Yes.
But
no, I'm asking you that is it what you are saying?
Yes, Chairperson. And I don't have the English to phrase it, but I'm saying
that's fine.
At whatever cost.
All I'm saying is that I know at all costs, the worry is always that you'd look at bailouts and bailouts and bailouts.
Yes.
And nothing. So understand that I understand where you come from.
Oh, I appreciate it,
was
Chair. Thank you.
discussed. So all I'm asking is whether members would be comfortable that we leave it at a point that the department should endeavor to save SAPO from going under. I think the minister used the same words even previously, right? And therefore today we're more explicit in the summary we have made based on your inputs as members, that you look at all other options so that we don't limit to be only about bailouts.
I'm happy to let it go, Chairperson, because I think it covers the sentiment that even though we may agree on how to get to that point, we agree on some principles. So I'm happy to leave it there.
Okay, that's fine, Honorable Bolani. Let's proceed then. With that correction having been made, can we then have a mover and seconder?
I move, Chair.
Honorable Bolani moves. Can I get a seconder?
A second, Chair.
Honorable Kumbu seconds. No objection in us adopting these minutes with the corrections made? No objection, so the minutes are also minutes of the 30th are agreed to. Am I correct? Committee support, that was the last set?
That was the last item, Chair.
Okay. Honorable members, for other details, would be getting a communication, firstly on the point raised by the minister. Secondly, I will also ask the committee support to follow up on, as members would remember, there were matters we asked that we get them in writing, because we're almost probably next week will be our last meeting of the committee, unless there will be changes in the program of Parliament. Those matters we asked for, amongst others, if members would remember, when we're dealing with budget votes, there was also an issue with regard to USASA on IDTVs versus set-top boxes, the split in numbers, if that approach is gonna be. So it's just one example. So you can understand, Honorable Bolana, I listened to all members. There was a caution that once it's in writing, it may not come. So we're ensuring that they took up before we leave, so we'll get a sense of that. I think administration will also communicate as it relates to the roundtable discussions, whether we have enough responses and if we're proceeding in that way. So those would be communicated to members. Otherwise, honorable members, in terms of the business for today, we have concluded the business for the meeting. Honorable Bodan.
Chairperson, thank you so much. Can we get an indication of the next meeting, whether it's going to be in person or virtual, so we can start making flight arrangements?
As far as I understand, Honorable Bolani, if you can check it there in our program, the 13th actually was going to be the virtual on the basis of people that are inviting to make inputs in the round table discussion. So I take it that it still remains the same.
Wonderful, thank you, Chair.
In any way in getting venues for that big number. Yeah, so that's basically that. But as I say, there will be communication in any way in terms of the responses that have been received, and we prepare as such. So even with the part of the minister, if he has to appear, it will still be on that arrangement visually. Thank you. Honorable Mazwane.
Chairperson, I just wanted to say, which I think we don't say often enough, a thank you to yourself as chairperson and to your the committee staff. I certainly have never been in a committee where I've received as much information as timeously as I have before. So I would just like to say a thank you for making sure that we are kept up to date and that we do get as much information as we possibly can before the committee meetings. It really does help us in preparation for the meeting. So thank you very much for that.
Really appreciate Honorable Mazone, and I'm sure the committee support, they also hear that there's that appreciation, which should be a motivating factor for doing more. I think that's how I will take it from the side of the committee. With that having been said, honorable members, the meeting stays adjourned until we meet again. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.